well, we'll have that.
So
Because live. Cool. Hello. Welcome to this week's Neon Eye Curation podcast. I'm Callum. I have with me
Caitlin.
Patrick.
Who will be discussing today what have you done with Solange, not with Solange. Much worse. It's like
Very different films.
yeah, not good. A good start. So Patrick has written all the reviews for this Java series. This is our fourth entry. I can hear myself. So you can get those all on our website. Last week we talked about Deep Red, and we've also done Blood and Black Lace and Your Voice is Locked Room in the Eye of the Key. I'm going to insist on getting that
The full
title.
title.
I'm not going to cut it halfway.
Half the video length.
Yeah, no half measure. So they're all on our website. You can watch our previous podcast on our YouTube channel. The reviews and intros are on our website. Next week we'll be talking about Suspiria. This week's supplementary, if you're interested in learning more, is Four Flies on Grey Velvet.
Yeah, Four Flies on Grey Velvet,
Yeah.
which is a really loose Dario Argento film where he just liked to show off all his new toys that he'd been able to afford with his excessive burly crystal plumage. It's interesting following a rock musician instead of a usual sort of amateur sleuth who is framed for a murder and blackmailed, but in reality it's just Dario Argento using slow-mo to decapitate people over and over. He wanted to have Deep Purple do the score, but they said he wasn't interested, so he got a score from Ennio Morricone that was halfway completed before he told him it was shit, and Morricone left the picture. So yeah, it's a really turbulent week with no Argento.
And Morricone, of course, did the score for this one as well.
Morricone did the score for this, yeah.
So the idea, supplementaries are very much just if you're interested in learning more, you can find those on the website. Next week we'll be talking about Suspiria, so you can go on the website, read Patrick's introduction, then watch the film. We'll be talking about it here next Thursday at 8. But tonight we're talking about what have you done to Solange. So as usual, having done it once, we'll start with a synopsis of it. So, Caitlin, what did you start with? What did you?
Oh, do I have to give this?
Yeah, I'm just gonna put this on you. Well, I'll help. We can all chip in, but so it starts with Enrico, right?
Enrico,
the Italian PE teacher, in London.
Mm-hmm.
Then what?
We're not doing.
I should say we'll go. I think we should launch So this is going to be a spoiler discussion, so we'll launch into spoilers from the start.
From the start, alright. Okay.
Yeah,
Yep.
so feel free to drop anything. Feel free to drop what happens to
Yeah.
Solange, as grim as it is.
We'll build up to that.
Yeah, bit build up.
So,
So yeah, Enrico, he's a pretty cool misogynistic guy.
yeah, he's a real dirtbag, isn't he?
Not great. You know, starts on a river with one of his kids. Nothing weird about that. One of his that he's teaching, just to be clear.
Yeah.
Slightly better, but not much better.
Not much. So yeah, the film begins with Enrico, played by Italian actor Fabio Testi, who is in a boat with his student Elizabeth, who he's having an affair with, and she witnesses a murder taking place on the riverbank, but him being a dirtbag just keeps going to her, oh, you're not seeing anything, you're just being frigid, and why do you want to do this? Because yeah, he's a charming guy.
Yeah.
But it soon turns out that Elizabeth did see something, and it turns out the murdered schoolgirl was one of her classmates. So the film begins down. It's interesting, it doesn't do the sort of amateur detective thing for a while until he becomes directly involved, but the film starts with several of her classmates turning up dead and sort of investigates connections they have.
Yeah. And what's interesting from the start is that they don't, compared to pretty much every other, well, in fact, every other one we've watched in the series so far, they really don't show the violence in this one. It's very much I think you just said left to the imagination, left to the horrible. I mean, there's not much to be left to the imagination, but there is something.
I think that's personally one of my favourite things about this film, though. I feel it was, having seen quite a few other Giallo films, they could have, and a few of them do linger in the gory details with scenes like that, but in this, there's a lot of really clever transitions that sort of go, you know what happened, we don't have to show this. And I think the horror does it. I mean, it's incredibly unpleasant, the murder method, but the horror comes more from the emotional resonance of the killings, and I found that really interesting.
It's very different. The whole killing angle is very different. It's almost the same in the sort of plot in the terms of just people just dying, but you know, even in the grittier ones, like I feel like I'm gonna bring it back to your Vice, but even it had that more. It was silly and messy, but it had a bit more of an artistic edge to it. Even when it was the killing scenes, it was this like, and then the like very red blood like pouring out, and it's like, I mean, it just jars a bit. Whereas in this, it felt like this film maybe felt more modern in that sense, or just different stylistically in the sense it didn't feel massively over the top.
Yeah, I think that's reflected in the setting as well, because we're shown it taking place in London. I think is so characteristic to the whole aesthetic of What Have You Done to Solange. It isn't going for that fully decadent, there's no sort of close-ups of slit throats or, as you said, bright red blood or ridiculously sort of convoluted chase and murder scenes. It's sleazy, it's nasty, it gets under your skin, but it doesn't feel gratuitous in its sort of, at least I don't think so, in the way it plays out. It takes a complete left turn with how brutal it's willing to be in the final 15 minutes or so. I think for the most part there's a real uneasy sort of, as you said, gritty and voyeuristic presentation that I think just drives home this constant sense of dread, because a lot of the film is, there's a really interesting motif that keeps showing up in the film of people watching other people through peepholes or keyholes, and sort of, you're constantly guessing, am I seeing this through the eyes of the murderer, or am I seeing this through the eyes of one of the many perverts who make up the cast of this? And I think it's just a really uneasy wee film, unlike a lot of other Giallo, which are just so in your face, this is shocking, this is violent, this is happening,
Mm-hmm.
this one wants to unsettle.
Yeah, I think it's made more. It feels more real in that sense as well. It's a bit. I think that's why it's unsettling, because we'll come to this more later. But I think in the other three that I've watched, the gratuity of some of the deaths is a bit like, oh my god, like the bell scene and the bath scene and Deep Red's many killings. But there's something about that flashback.
Yeah.
It was just so. I was like, it was hard to watch because you just knew. You kind of knew what was happening as it was unraveling, and it was very just unpleasant.
Yeah. For me, I think the moment in that where first started to feel properly uncomfortable was, as I said earlier, Ennio Morricone doing the score for this. A lot of it's quite sort of jazzy and just moves it forward, because a lot of film is police sort of procedural stuff, and that could have been so dry if it didn't have. There's a fair bit of humour within the film, which surprised me the first time I watched it, especially the inspector calling Enrico out and just sort of going, "You're just a piece of shit," essentially, like just going to him, sleazebag. But as soon as you enter that flashback, the score becomes very dissonant, and it's just droning sort of notes that really make you uncomfortable. But yeah, it's a bit foreshadowing for what you're gonna.
The score was cool as well, and the other scene I remember noting or thinking about at the time, it was very weirdly funny, was the one with that guy with the big beard comes out. He's like, "I can punch a priest if I've ever met one." It's just so. It was like funny. It was just so random. It's just there were lots of. It had its moments like that.
I forgot about that. That was funny.
So angry.
But I think that's what makes. We should probably actually mention what happens in the flashback, I guess, when we dance around it.
Got that. Well, if we keep progressing, so we've had Enrico has a sort of lover that's a student that witnesses a killing, and then so the killings are, you just see the knife move between the woman's legs very pleasantly. And so then it kind of becomes. So we very briefly talked earlier. It's interesting hearing. I think what it actually executes very well, that all the genres we've seen so far do to some extent, is the whole red herrings, who is it, kind of thing. And as we were watching it, we were very much in agreement at 2 points about who it was, and it was neither of those people. Because you were the one who pointed out that.
Yeah, well, the first one, the priest. Yeah, I think that's what we were saying to you before, but we thought it was the priest because of the going to confession and the girls were giggling, and there was something going on with them. Doing something that the priests perhaps wouldn't approve of.
And then we were like, then they were like, when they realised they were wearing the all black, and then it was like, this feels too easy. And then you were like, how long's left? And I was like, an hour.
It was
It's
no way.
probably not the priest, is it? But then you were the one that came up with the theory that it was his wife.
It was Enrico's wife.
Yeah, okay, this one interests me. Is this
because why did I think
I mean, I was convinced by your theory because it became a sort of like, she's jealous of her husband's extramarital
relations, and she doesn't know who it is. She never knew that it was Elizabeth, right? Until Elizabeth comes into
dead.
So she was just going around killing the girls that she knew were in the clique and thought was.
Okay.
She also wore all black as well.
And she wasn't there when Enrico went to have a chat with her. She wasn't there, so we never got to speak to her. And then Elizabeth was dead, and
it would have been quite convenient.
Yeah. So I was like,
oh, that's quite a good theory. Yeah.
Thanks.
See, for me, I just had there's a teacher with the long curly hair who every time we came on screen, I was just like, it's too obvious. Yeah, it was just so creepy. And it's like the ultimate red herring, where there's a scene where he's literally watching the girls shower, and you kind of go, okay, if anyone's a killer, it's gonna be you.
Yeah, really giving the game away.
I think I kind of wanted him just to get caught.
Yeah, for
Watching
something.
it, I was just like, oh god, just put you in jail. Get
Yeah.
off me.
He was also like so desperate. Like every time Enrico came over, he was like, "Sex maniac." That's what he is. It's like it's a little touch defensive there, buddy.
Projecting something.
Yeah, really doing that.
I think.
So yeah, go on.
I was just gonna say, I think actually, because as you said, all of the murders are, it's suggested to the viewer, it's unpleasant. You do see the photo of one of the crimes, but Elizabeth's definite that is the one sort of moment of true like on-screen brutality in it. That's quite a long scene as well.
It is.
Yeah.
And she's also quite a well-developed character, or just she's certainly had a lot of screen time. So that one I think has real impact as well. And because she seemed like quite a nice character, really.
But that's the thing, yeah. She seemed nice and sort of a bit naive to how creepy Enrico's character actually was.
True.
And the film keeps doing very interesting things. I was reading an article about this film where it talked about how she began to associate sex with violence, and that's why she keeps having the nightmares, but wakes up at the moment where the blade would go into the person who's meant to be her being resisting. So the film does a lot to sort of project her as a potential protagonist, only for them to be killed. So it's a very sudden scene as well. I didn't expect it the first time I watched it. It just
comes,
happens,
doesn't it? As soon as she's in the apartment, you're like, well, he's in the apartment, I suppose.
At the end as well, after I'd thought about it as well, I was like, why did Elizabeth why did she get killed when it was him? But I suppose it was just to protect. He was trying to protect himself from being caught. But she wasn't actually involved in what happens in the flashback, right?
So maybe we should explain the flashback at this point.
Yeah.
No, that's good.
That's a good point.
But so in the flashback, there's basically, it's very, like we say, it's black and white as well, which is interesting. And they cut back to how it all began, and then they sort of have a bit of exposition after that sort of wraps the whole thing up, where you meet this woman called Solange, who's a really interesting character. I mean, we'll come to it, some of the mental health politics in it, not fantastic.
Not great,
but really, I don't know, that first shot, really, where you see her upside down, do you remember when they're lying in the grass area at the fair or whatever?
Yeah. And
it's almost like something out, well, I mean, this kind of is a horror,
so
but
creepy.
It was really weird because I think one of my favourite parts of the film is how the film's called What Have You Done to Solange? And Solange just isn't in it.
She comes in maybe an hour into the film. Yeah.
It's quite bold, really. And it's, I think what's so brilliant about it as well is it's that interaction with, I wrote his name, Philip Sullivan, the guy on the boat, is it? Yeah.
Yes.
We can talk about that in a minute, maybe.
Let's get on to that.
Yeah, but they just there's something really, I don't know, really effective about the way there's this character that you've never seen or met, but she somehow fits into the mystery. I think it was really effective. And when you see her, there's this weird kind of ethereal figure just walking around this fair. It was impressive.
Oh yes, that is, yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
The whole way she conducts herself within the film, sort of hunched up, wide-eyed. It's quite unsettling.
Yeah.
In sort of the real world, sort of.
But so just to cover I've got lots of thoughts on that. But the flashback, just so we're on the same page, is that basically it turns out that Solange got pregnant, and so to do the abortion, they basically got this woman, Ruth, I can't remember her surname, to do it with a needle, but it traumatized her, and to the point where she's just infantile regression.
Or PTSD in real world talk, I guess, yeah.
I don't know if it's maybe important to explain that in the school there's it turns out that there's a clique of girls who are
Yeah, I believe the character Philip says that Solange and the girls that he murdered were into sex and drug orgies.
Yeah.
I think is how they very tactfully put it.
At one point, doesn't Enrico say like something about drug culture that it really jarred? He was like, yes, and they've probably been doing the drugs too. It's like, wow, sounds like a cool dude, Enrico.
Right, sweet PSA and your sleazy Italian horror.
yeah. But yeah, and you were saying about the flashback. Why do you think, given the revelation, because it was Solange's father that was the killer in the end, why did they kill Elizabeth?
Because in the flashback, Elizabeth, this group of girls, there's a group of them who are encouraging this abortion, and then Elizabeth and another girl are trying to talk Solange out of it. So then I was like, why did Elizabeth get murdered when she hadn't actually
been present for that?
Yeah, whereas the other girls, like the one with the short brown hair and the other blonde one, they weren't.
Was it not Elizabeth who saw the priest in confessional, or I believe, because he was disguised as a priest when he kills the first girl, and I think it's her that says to the board of teachers from memory, though it was a priest who has been killing these girls. So I think it was covering his tracks.
Right, that makes sense. And that makes sense in that the way she was killed was because she was drowned, right, rather than. So I think there's loads of interesting talking points brought up there. I mean, there's so many. Does anyone want to take the lead on thoughts? I mean, I have loads, but.
Well, as a wee side note, I find it really interesting the casting in this film, because Solange herself is Camille Keaton, who, I don't know if you guys have heard of the film I Spit on Your Grave, which is like a really controversial 70s, was termed as a rape revenge film, horror film, same as like Last House on the Left, but I made her a complete horror icon, and this was her debut role. Fabio Testi was in Once Upon a Time in the West, the Sergio Leone film, which Dario Argento wrote, and the wife and the police inspector were both in the series of crimi films that were based on Edgar Wallace's novels, which were essentially German giallos, but there's a lot of debate as to whether this film is giallo or crimi, as that was always based on the procedural sort of stuff. There's just some little side notes.
No, that's interesting. Yeah. I thought the acting was pretty excellent on that one, though. I was going to say about there's loads we could talk about here, but there's definitely, I think the counterculture would be an interesting thing to deconstruct here, because I think there's lots of ways you could interpret it, because it seems, I think you wrote in your intro as well, that it's actually quite sympathetic to the victims in some ways, this film, rather than being like propaganda against the counterculture, but it still feels like it's got an edge against it, with like the comments about the drugs. I also wondered how the Catholic Church played into all this, because it feels like maybe this is too much at once, but I think there's a cultural thing going on with people's attitudes towards counterculture, and things that are part of culture with the church, and there's also abortion is raised as well, and young women having sex and virginity and all this. I don't know, what do you guys think about how all this pieces together?
I think definitely with the counterculture, it's kind of a classic thing with was it Philip Morris who said it was a guy on the boat?
Sullivan, yeah.
Philip Sullivan. I think it does that classic shallow thing of bloody hippies, and he's just good for the plot point. There's a really weird scene where Enrico accosts him on the side of the boat that every time I've watched this, I'm just going to go, what is this? This is just sort of grabs him out of nowhere.
I know, it's so bizarre.
It just feels highly aggressive, but with the whole sort of sexual liberty thing, I think that would come off, at least in my reading of the film, I think it comes off as less problematic than just sort of going, oh, it's against young women having sex, or sort of being free themselves, because it's a double standard from Enrico. I think the whole thing is sort of framing it in he's completely facilitating this and he's abusing his position of power, but he doesn't see that as wrong. He sees them going off and doing it of their own accord without him as the problem. So I think the film is trying to. I think he's one of the most questionable protagonists we've had in this series so far. Not quite Olivero levels of evil.
Your voice.
Yeah.
Of course. God, yeah. Throwback.
And with the Catholic Church angle, this would have come just after Don't Torture a Duckling, where Lucio Fulci pretty much just expresses hatred for the Catholic Church by suggesting that a priest in a small town in Italy was responsible for a lot of child murders, which is that's a really dark.
What a stretch.
Yeah. But I think this film is trying to reflect perhaps and move away from the counterculture and move away from religion in at least popular culture in that time. So I think it's trying to be challenging on a lot of different bases. What do you guys make of those themes?
I was just going to ask, with the counterculture, what's the giallo like? What's the relationship?
Well, giallo came at the time of sort of late 60s, early 70s, when the whole sort of hippie movement was dying out, and quite often they would feature sort of characters living in middle or upper middle class and sort of decadence who would be naturally opposed to it. But it framed it mainly as an enemy just because popular culture was moving so far away from that, and I think it was easy to sort of go, that's dying out, this is something new, the 70s sort of time of anger, more political and social growth instead of free love sort of type sensibilities.
Makes sense. Yeah, I think that it's interesting. It was interesting when I haven't seen Don't Torture a Duckling, but when it seemed like the killers were the priests, it seemed a bit like, interesting, going against the Catholic Church, aren't we? But it's interesting how in some ways I wonder if I feel like it's more complex than this, but didn't really go against the Catholic Church and kind of agreed with their main principles, maybe even down to the abortion, in the way that it's like it's quite it could come across as quite anti-abortion, the fact it like goes wrong. Maybe, I don't know.
See, I'm conflicted on the whole presentation of the abortion aspect of this, because I think it's really interesting, first off, that they actually included it in a film that was 72, I believe, and to have it as a main plot turning point. Yeah, they do the whole thing of, it's damaged her mentally and she's now infantile aggression, sort of shell shocked from it. But I almost, maybe it's hoping that it was more progressive than it perhaps is in its stance. I was sort of hoping it was more in the way of going, because it was forced into a back alley sort of style due to her age.
Right.
I think it was more sort of making a
possible,
stance on that.
Yeah. That seems like a fair way to read it.
That's how I read it.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting that it had been included in the film anyway, and that it was less like, I don't know, I didn't think the intention was to put a bad spin on it, although it could be read like that. But what do you think?
I could see, without having watched it like 3 hours ago and not thought about it too much, I could see both readings. I think it was just interesting. It was interesting how the priest didn't come off fantastically either, but I think that it felt at worst neutral on the Catholic Church, I suppose. I think that was interesting. But I suppose in the way that it was, I suppose the killer was, because it also seemed during it like they were being punished for their, being sexually active, I suppose. Whereas by the end, it wasn't really to do with that. It was to do with just the fact that it was a botched abortion or whatever.
But then also, if you look at the entire reason why Solange's father was killing, because he so inherently has to have someone for blame for what's happened, that he picks them all up going, they must have forced her. There's no way that she would have done that on her own. And it's almost as if he's going, I mean, the priest cautions entirely, sort of points out his sort of Old Testament sort of mindset within it, eye for an eye type thing, and even the way he murders them is incredibly on the nose.
Yeah.
But I think it's more to do with his delusions and sort of he has to be the one to set this right.
Interesting. That's an interesting point, and I think that sort of segues nicely to another sort of interesting talking point, which is the way it deals with mental health, and it definitely has its moments that clang, especially on a modern watch with the, we've said it a few times, with the infantile regression. But it's interesting that they portrayed it at all. And I was also just thinking about how it's interesting how in, I think, every other genre we've watched so far, that the killer always comes across quite composed and in control. I'm just thinking of your advice. It's all I can think about. It's most of ever since I watched it. It's
God, I'm sorry.
pretty much all I think about. But it was like this sort of scheme, and it was, and in Blood and Black Lace as well, it was this like scheme between wife and So it was interesting how in this one it was like Solange was really disturbed, as was, well, not differently, kind of what you're just saying there, that her father was not a kind of like sophisticated, cool killer. He was like driven to that because of what had happened. I don't know what you guys think about that, but I thought it was interesting that they kind of really delved into it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, as you say, he's not composed. It's from such a strong place of emotion that's driving him. And there's a scene where he takes the final girl who doesn't end up getting killed, and I'm forgetting her name, but he takes her up, so it does a whole exposition explaining why it's happening and everything. And he's furious. He's just coming to sort of a point of, if I saw a chance, I took it. That's as far as his sort of methodology goes. I think as well, with talking about mental health and the actual character Solange, I think what's really interesting with this, they didn't do the cliche thing of she's disturbed and she's going to be leading them to be murdered because she hates him and blames him. But there's a scene at the end when the police officers turn up at the apartment and she leads them upstairs. She shows them the scene that sort of the jacket that ends up getting him caught. I think that was interesting. They didn't go for the whole, she's troubled, she must be evil, she must be sort of vindictive.
It was interesting, and I remember you talking about this last week, and how these films, it's quite a modern trend especially to use mental health as a device to scare. It's an interesting ethical one, because in some sense the way that the trauma affected Solange is quite scary, but obviously it didn't get everything right as well. I'm just wondering what you think about how someone does psychology especially, but how you think that chimes, and whether you can represent mental health in that way, or whether it's not very helpful.
I suppose, if that happened to you, it would be traumatising at that age anyway. How old were the girls? 16?
Yeah,
15,
I think they're just 15, 16. But at the time of flashback, I think they're meant to be 13.
13.
Wow.
Yeah, so I sort of I don't really know how I feel about it, because if that happened to you at that age, you probably would be traumatised by it. Whether or not you would become what Solange like the way she was behaving. I don't think it'd be that.
Do you think it's okay for the film to use it as a way to scare you, the fact that she's like that? Or do you think the film even does that?
It didn't scare me.
Yeah.
I didn't find Solange scary.
Yeah,
I don't know if either of you did.
Maybe that's not quite how I felt towards it. It was more, I think what I found disturbing, I suppose, was how you could see what she was like now, and then you watched her in the flashback and you almost saw it happening to her. Do you know what I mean? That trauma, which, I don't know.
I suppose then it was more disturbing.
Yeah.
Than it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure what I think about that, as whether or not I think it's okay. And
certainly, I think the way they talked about it, in like the infantile regression, and that I think we're all agreed that wasn't great. But I'm just interested in more generally the fact that they're putting it on screen in quite a way that's quite extreme. You know, she's like seriously troubled because of this trauma. Is that? I mean, how does that sit with you, I suppose?
See, at first it wasn't actually the first time I meet Solange, because that scene in the park where you've got Enrico and his wife, and then they go off to do an investigation, and she runs off, and you're a nurse going, "Oh, Solange, come back," and you go, "Oh, that's clever, they've managed to keep that going," so that's what the film's about.
Yeah.
But the scene where she's in the sort of fun fair on the carousel, and then goes off with the other girl and goes into the car. I thought that was an interesting red herring, because you do sort of go at first, oh, she's disturbing, because that's the same facial expression, and I think there's a lead up to it where you're kind of going, there's something not right here. Then you find out what it is, and I think she becomes a character of sympathy very quickly, and I think it completely changes your perception. As you said, it's not perfect representation of a complex sort of theme within it, but I think it could be handled a lot worse.
That's true. I think that's a fair way of putting it. And it was interesting as well, the father, you know, how that was portrayed as someone who's seemed disturbed by what had happened as well. I don't know whether they were going for that or whether it was just how they wrote the character, but it seems quite clever. In general, the way they used that, it feels like when you look at it at the end, it doesn't seem like the plot twists, by the time they've all come through, actually make any of these, you know, they don't make the fact, like you were just saying, the fact she's disturbing a negative part of her character. It's just the way it twists and turns, and the fact she like showed them where everything was, almost was just, you were kind of saying, made her not the negative character, and it also, I think, just showed that it was like she was really disturbed, and it was just it felt like they really went all in on the portrayal, which I think I found it really worked, and was, like you're saying, they could have handled it a lot worse, and I actually think they did, for the time, probably a pretty good job of the way they portrayed it. But,
yeah, I definitely say so. I think a lot of that comes down to Keaton's performance as Solange, but I also think this film, I don't think it's something we've really touched upon yet. I think it does a fantastic job with the visual storytelling of the whole thing. It was Joe D'Amato who was the cinematographer on this, but I think a lot of the films, as we said earlier, the unease from like the keyholes and the sort of peepholes and everything, but also some of the more sympathetic moments, just the close-ups of Solange's face, and there's a moment early on where the police officer has an x-ray of one of the victims' bodies, and then it transitions so smoothly to the eyes of the parents who are seeing the photos of their daughter, and the film just sort of, it emotionally manipulates you quite cleverly, but I think that's why I found this so engrossing.
I would agree. It's very well edited, you sort of touched on that, but there was that scene as well where when they kill the second girl, I think, and with the knife, and then it almost like in one movement goes to Elizabeth waking from a nightmare. It's just very well executed, if nothing else.
I suppose that comes down to Massimo Dallamano's history as the cinematographer for Sergio Leone on Fistful of Dollars and A Few Dollars More. So those films are incredible looking within the spaghetti western, but first I suppose it's his own stamp on what giallo could be. I think he really achieves that in terms of, I said, the visuals and in storytelling. There isn't another giallo like this, I don't think, because it is mature, and I think that's one of the most interesting aspects that we've touched on a lot here. Is it feels like an adult film without just going, let's make this violent, let's make this hypersexualized, or yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Should we start wrapping up? You guys were talking earlier about, you're saying that Refn wants to do a remake of this film. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Nicholas Winding Refn has his production company, which he has been eyeing up controversial 60s and 70s horror pictures, because it's a Nicholas Winding Refn move to do. But he is apparently looking for a director to helm a remake of What Have You Done to Solange, and that'll be interesting to say the least. Today he signed on John Hillcoat to do Witchfinder General, so...
Oh really? I didn't hear what he's... because that's a classic, isn't it?
It's a classic, yeah, it's an incredibly disturbing classic, it's 68 and it's still shocking to this day, some of the content in there. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what Hillcoat does with that, because I don't know if you guys saw The Road or The Proposition.
No, I don't think so.
He's a bleak filmmaker, but
cool.
Yeah. So it'd be interesting to see if a film actually it was interesting to see if the remake of this film keeps the sort of core elements of it and things as problematic as infantile aggression. I think the only real problem I have for this film is just as it's building up something really interesting in the finale, you have the killer shoot himself, the policeman comes in and goes, oh yeah, this happened, infantile aggression, it's all done now. It ends. It's giallo films have a tendency to sort of just wrap everything up neatly then call it a day, but with this one I found it especially jarring.
That's fair.
I just don't think you can do a remake of this film today. Like, I just think there are so many things in it that are problematic.
Yeah.
That to remake it now, like the fact that there is the plot focuses on this group of girls who are at an all-girls Catholic school, and they're like going out and like having sex and stuff, and they're being killed because of that.
Yeah.
It's like.
It would be interesting to see if it does happen, how they handle it and how they try and modernise some of the political aspects of it. So it's also a very excellent segue to next week's film, which has been remade. Suspiria was remade last year by
Luca Guadagnino.
Yeah. Director of Call Me by Your Name. Yeah.
Very different film.
Quite a transition. So next week's film has been remade. I didn't see the remake. You did?
I did.
You're going to do a piece on it, aren't you?
I'm going to do a piece on it. So the original Suspiria is cliche phrase, but it's sort of a technicolor nightmare where everything is pushed to excess. The story is completely stripped back. It's 90 minutes or so, and it just moves at such an incredible pace through this German expressionism and Disney-based nightmare, but it's a lot more on that in my piece because I find that bizarre. But the remake was 2.5 hours long, has Tilda Swinton playing 3 characters.
An hour added onto it.
Yeah, there's an hour added onto it, and it goes into the whole political structure of the witches that run the dance school in a lot of depth against the backing of the Berlin Wall. Yeah.
See, there's one way you could just play around with the structure, and then they could do a good.
Is it quite different to the original?
It's completely different, and I love the original. I did quite like the remake, which really surprised me because I went to a preview screening of it at the Cameo just here in Edinburgh, and the people before it started, one of them hadn't seen Spirit, and the other one was going, "Oh, it's amazing! It's non-stop. It's insane. you're gonna love it. It's just so excessive. And I heard the same guy at the end of it turn to me and go, "What the fuck was that?" It's a very different film, but I'm glad it went for its own identity.
Yeah, I think that's, and with Solange, I think that's how you'd have to do it. You have to really modernise it. Cool. All right. Well, thanks for joining both. We'll be here next week at 8 p. Well, next Thursday. This was a one-off. Next Thursday at 8 p.m. talking about Suspiria. So, thank you. I'll see you next week.
Thanks for having me.
Cool.